Hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to the Strange and Beautiful Book Club. It's our Tuesday episode, our Tuesday book club episode, the once a month we've read a book and now we're gonna talk about it episode. And today what we're going to be talking about is the most bonkers cuckoo nuts book No, you know what? No. We've read some pretty out there shit, but this one is pretty far up there. So
You're welcome.
So if you didn't read Star Maker and you're just relying on us to summarize this book, good on you. It's perfectly fine. Totally approve of that method because this is one where we've taken one for the team, ladies and gentlemen, and however you define yourself, because this isn't for everybody. All right. What I would like you to do to really set the scene for how it feels to read Star Maker. All right, everyone, we're going to set a scene in our mind. Are you ready? Okay. Imagine you're in a college classroom. There's rows and rows of seats. It's dark. You can't really see the people around you. You might as well be alone. You're staring forward at a blackboard waiting for the teacher to arrive. The teacher walks in. They pull out a stool. They sit down. And for the next 6.5 hours, they just talk. There are no slides, there are no pictures, there are no questions, they take no breaths, they take no breaks, they just talk for 6.5 hours. And they don't talk about interesting things, they talk about the universe in an ever-widening perspective until they finally land on having zoomed out so far, they see the being that formed the universe itself. And then they just get up and walk out the door. And that's the end.
And the very end is like they're closing the class. And that's why my home and my family are very important.
And then they leave.
And
that's it. They don't ask it. Nope, nothing.
Okay. You want to hear my take on it?
Okay.
Okay. Kind of same intro. It's just somebody that's going to talk about the universe and speculating about what may be out there. But motivation-wise, it's like a shaggiest dog story that just got way out of hand, where you could have just gone on for like 45 minutes or an hour, right? And you'd be like hitting that point where the audience is like, okay, how much farther is this going to go? Is like, when are we going to get to the punchline? Is there a punchline? No, it goes on for... I think when I had the audiobook was like 7 or 8 hours. And so it's like 8 hours.
Yeah.
And there is no punchline.
There is no punchline.
Oh,
there are no characters.
A lot of
no
this
plot.
Stuck with me. I read this years ago.
I'm not saying it's not an interesting book.
A lot of the snippets of this have stuck with me. And when I suggested this book to read for the podcast, I remembered like the first 3 or 4 worlds, and then some other stuff, and then the Star Maker, and then done. Okay, that was interesting. That was fun.
I think he wrote the first 35%, and then his friends gave him some really good shrooms. And he took them, and he sat down.
I'm sure there were psychedelics involved.
And when he woke up, the book was finished, and he was like, do I need to go back and read that? And then he was like, no, I trust myself. I'm pretty sure I did a really good job.
This is like 1930s England. I don't need an editor.
Yeah, that's fine. This isn't, I would hesitate to even call this a story because there is no plot. We do not start somewhere. We do not go on, we go on an adventure, but not for any purpose, really. There's no characters. The protagonist is unnamed. It feels very British sci-fi where it's like, I'm H.G. Wells. I'm just going to be the observer. I'm the narrator. I don't need to have a character. I don't need to have a name. I am the lens through which these people will be experiencing this sci-fi adventure. Adventure, not adventure. It's really difficult to quantify this. You know what it really feels like? This feels like the most British imperialist fucking book I have ever read in my entire life. It was literally like, what if a British man colonized the universe? What would that be like?
I thought, from the perspective of this is a like early 1900s British guy that wrote this, this feels extremely progressive in some parts.
In some parts, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really like the universe needs to gain an understanding of itself. We need the seed of a snowball that will roll around the universe and gather up different perspectives and create this super cosmical being that will be able to comprehend something as large as the Star Maker. How can we start that? Why? I mean, the answer is obvious. We need a fucking British dude. Like, who else starts that snowball? It really feels like the joke that how do you know Star Trek was written by a white person? Because the opening is go where no man has gone before, but literally every planet they land on is populated.
I think it's supposed to be humans.
I know. But the joke is... the joke stands.
Yeah. And, it holds up.
And honestly, probably the hardest part for me was some of the dated description of stuff was like everyone was human. Did they reach the level of human or did they not reach the level of human? Wow, that guy is a human, but he sure looks fucking gross. I don't know why he didn't look British like every other sane individual.
Right, where
in the
nowadays
universe.
you'd say conscious or sentient.
Yeah.
As a like a conscious mind that isn't biologically human.
Right.
It's just a person.
Yeah.
Like person has become, in certain circles, the like generic description for a conscious being.
And it was a really interesting mix of really, really imaginative and unique sci-fi settings mixed with really mundane. We couldn't have pushed the boat out far enough. It was like we meet this race that is a symbiotic relationship between basically fish and crabs. And as imaginative as he is, he's like, it's an ocean. It has fish in it. They meet a crab. They get together. They become...
Right. They're originally symbiotic rivals. Then they cooperate.
Yeah. And in the vastness of space, is every ocean going to develop a fish? Not something else? But then we get a planet where they've long since lost their atmosphere, but they figured out a way to trap everything in the soil. And so during the day, they're like half plant, half people. So during the day, they attach themselves to roots. They go into this meditative state and they're able to photosynthesize all day. And then they work or do their business all night. And okay, well, that's really imaginative. But then fish and crabs. Oh, okay. And then we get even bigger. It just felt like sometimes he was like the living ships. Like, what if
that one felt really contrived?
What the fuck? The living ship.
That's part of the shroom trip.
That was, yeah. He didn't go back and read that. I don't know. Overall impression, I think probably not every, but a lot of the sci-fi readers that I have read this, because I could probably sit here and tell you 6 books that this is similar to. Like how everybody's telepathically communicating and the whole universe is connected telepathically, and that once they're all connected telepathically, that's when we reach utopia. And that is basically the premise of Orson Scott Card's Worthing Saga.
Yeah.
And the Worthing Saga and it follows a similar vein where we have a single character who hops through time and witnesses the effects of his decisions because he's mildly telepathic. And so he heads off on this colony ship and he ends up forming a colony, having a couple kids. And then he's like, cool, select for telepathy. See you guys in 1,000 years. And then he goes to sleep and comes back. and everybody is super telepathic. And he's like, cool, keep doing that. And he leaves and comes back. And by the time he comes back, they are so telepathic, they literally control the universe. And that's basically what happens at the end of this book. And you know what it also reminded me of? Two things. Mm-hmm. Spore, where you start as a single-celled organism, and every time you get big enough, you zoom out and you can see more of the world, and then you zoom out and you can see more of the world, and then you have the chance to evolve. And then once you evolve, the whole process starts over again. So that felt like that. And also, in Katamari Damacy,
oh, you're just always rolling
when
up.
you're rolling around and gathering things up, and when you get large enough, the way they rendered it on the PlayStation so that it could, like, you could keep playing is once you leveled up large enough, items that were smaller than a certain size disappeared. Like, you could no longer perceive them. Yeah. Which is basically what this book is. Once he gets big enough. Okay, so the basic premise of this book is this British guy goes out after dinner because he's questioning his life, and maybe he's a little mad at his wife, and I don't know. He lays down in a field, he falls asleep, and then he's traveling in the fucking universe.
His mind detaches from his body and...
Surprise, surprise. And he's like, am I dead, though? I don't feel dead, though. Am I dead, though? And he's like, well, I could travel. And I thought this was really interesting. This is the 1930s. So part of this is commentary on human nature and human nature as it relates to what he perceived as a inevitable war.
Yes.
And how is that type of conflict inevitable in every instance of mind? So in every civilized society that reaches a certain point, will they always go to war?
Right. Is this a problem endemic in civilization itself, or is this a human thing?
You're right. And then, is there someone pulling our strings? Is there a star maker? Which I thought it was interesting to use a sort of PC term. We don't call him God. We don't give God, we don't make it a God, a specific religion. It's just the star maker.
Right. Right. That's part of it that feels really progressive and, I don't know, modern.
Yeah.
Is that it's almost entirely stripped of any British specific cultural references.
Yeah.
There's like one paragraph or two paragraphs where he makes some references to Christ. Yeah. As an example of, like, here's kind of themes of religions that he's encountered. And one of them is he uses Christ as a reference a couple times. But that's, like, the closest thing you get. Like, he doesn't even talk about tea.
Yes, thank you.
And I guess ships.
And ships.
The British are big on ships. There's a whole planet of living ships.
Yeah.
So those are probably the biggest, like, anachronisms, and not really anachronisms, but the cultural version of anachronism.
Yeah,
the planetary version of anachronism.
That, and although we give the Star Maker sort of a generalized, thank you, overhaul. We do not dispense with the idea of a star maker.
Right.
There is a star maker. He just has to find it.
They're convinced there is.
Yeah.
But they don't have any explicit evidence for it.
Well, they believe it exists in some form. Is it conscious? Is it sentient? Is it benevolent? Is it malevolent? They don't know, but they believe it exists. Right. That there is an entity who is responsible for the creation of the universe.
Which gives some meaning to reality.
I think it gives him a thing to search for. Be
accidental.
This might actually be our attempt at the plot.
Ooh, it's a MacGuffin.
It is a MacGuffin. It's the thing he's looking for, is the Star Maker, because otherwise he's just aimlessly bumbling around the universe. Mm-hmm. Observing things.
Learning more about the universe for the sake of learning more about the universe.
Yeah, so the first thing that he really does is he leaves the Earth and he turns around and looks at the Earth, and I thought this was really cool. I perceived that I was on a little round grain of rock and metal, filmed with water and with air, whirling in sunlight and darkness. And on the skin of that little grain, all the swarms of men, generation by generation, had lived in labor and blindness, with intermittent joy and intermittent lucidity of spirit. And all their history, with its folk wanderings, its empires, its philosophies, its proud sciences, its social revolutions, its increasing hunger for community, was but a flicker in one day of the lives of stars.
This guy had a massive psychedelic out-of-body experience. And then to write this book, he spent a lot of time, like, he's up on the latest astronomical science of the day. And in the foreword, he gives some credit to
His
a specific
ayahuasca
author.
journey.
He gives credit to a specific author who he borrowed some worlds from.
Yeah.
Because he thought they were really cool.
I have noticed this. So I've been on that little journey where I'm reading a bunch of science fiction from around this period. And this was on my list for like in the first group of 25. And I have noticed they reference each other constantly by name. They will have their characters mention the other
their books would probably be the only way that they would communicate with each other in a decentralized way.
By Olaf's time, we get pulp science fiction, like science bodice rippers,
right,
damsels in space. But the H.G. Wells, the Jules Verne, the Olaf Stapledon, the C.S. Lewis, all those types of people, they're all working in their own bubble. They're, I hesitate to say.
They're a genre?
They're all in the same, they're all considered science fiction, but there's like the pulp science, and then there's this like speculative science fiction where it's these
like almost literary
gentlemen scientists who are speculating about the future of science and using this as a medium.
Futurists.
Yeah. And all of these futurists all reference each other constantly. And they're like, hey, thanks for that idea. It gave me this idea, and now I'm going to write about it. And the other guy would be like, no problem. You gave me this idea, and now I'm going to write about it. Yeah. And so they all reference it, which I think is really cool because they're not hiding the fact that they're all like
inspired.
They're bouncing the ball, and they're all coming up with new things. And then they're like, hey, ball's in your court. What's up next? And then,
it's not plagiarism. It's inspiration.
Right. Yeah. They're all working. They realize they don't exist in isolation, that they are inspired by each other. And so they just call it out for what it is, which is really nice. But yes, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I was saying that, yeah, he absolutely would have referenced somebody because that's something I have seen in this type of science fiction in this time period.
So he had some inspiration from some contemporaries. He had this ayahuasca journey, whatever.
Yeah.
And then he spent a lot of time just visualizing, like based on what I know of astronomical science and planets and stars and whatever, I'm just a point of view in, random solar system.
Yeah.
What's the weirdest thing I can come up with? What would that look like?
Yeah.
And then just like iterating on that over and over and over again. And that becomes the scenes in the book.
Yeah.
But you can tell he spent time just visualizing it. Not necessarily like narrativizing it.
Yeah.
But just visualizing whatever to get his settings. And I really like that part.
Yeah, he did it. And you can tell he is not working in a scientific void. He references quite a bit of actual science. So there's a part where he is traveling because he's traveling away from our solar system. And he's like, shit, I've stopped. I'm permanently stranded out here in the dark and I cannot move anymore and I'm dead. And this is what happens when you die. Shit. Like, this sucks. They're going to find my body. That sucks. I'm just laying in the heather. Did I even tell my wife I love her? And then he looks and he's like, oh, wait, the stars in front of me are blue and the stars behind me are red.
Right.
Actually, he says, they therefore affected me as slower pulsations than they normally were. And I saw them therefore as red. Those that met me on my headlong flight were congested and shortened and were seen as blue.
Which is a reference to relativity. And once you start getting close to the speed of light, you get red shift, blue shift.
Yeah.
The frequencies either lengthen or shorten because you're moving so fast.
Right. The red wavelength is longer. So if you're moving away from it, you can see
Things
it as
will
red.
get more and more red.
Yeah. And if you're moving towards it, it scrunches, for lack of a better word, the wavelength, and then you get blue light, which I thought was really cool. And then at the very end, he gives you that, here's the scale of the universe. If you wanted to depict how far we are, like if you assume that was like Ireland is the size of the solar system and you want to know how far away the nearest solar system is, you'd have to go halfway to the moon.
Oh, yeah. He even has a chart in the back of the book.
Oh, God, yes, he does. And I was like, dang, I need to grab that chart so I can put it up on Instagram because it's like, here's the chart of the Star Maker's journey from infancy to maturity. Thank you, Olaf. And that whole section at the end where he's talking about the vastness of space,
Right.
It reminded me of the conversation that we had with Haldane, because we talked to this author named Haldane who wrote a book called Vitreous Womb, which if you haven't read it, you should absolutely go check it out. But we talked to him in his interview. He said, a lot of science just sort of fuzzes over how vast and empty and inhospitable the universe is. Like we can't just bebop to a planet and, oh, look, this one's got people on it. Oh, that's great. Let's bebop to another planet. Space is vast, incomprehensibly vast. And that's part of what he's tackling in this book is how do you learn to perceive this? Because at first we're just traveling around and then he starts traveling towards stars, but they're all too young to have planets. He's traveling.
He starts picking targets, traveling to them.
Yeah.
And they're all planetless, or they just have gas giants or whatever.
Yeah.
But then he develops or discovers this new form of locomotion. I think he uses the word locomotion.
Yeah, he does. And every planet, okay.
But it's a more intuitive, like you find familiar situations. So he ends up finding a planet that's fairly Earth-like and has creatures that are human-like. They're humanoid shaped. Their faces are different, whatever.
Yeah.
But they have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head with eyes and a mouth.
Yeah. The way the telepathy of the universe works is you can only be attracted to something you can understand. And so he finds himself attracted to the thing most like himself to start with. And I highlighted this because honestly, when we are very micro and we're looking at just the planets is when he's at his most British. I'm talking 1930s British. Because every single planet, he's like, well, obviously they divide themselves into basically 2 groups. There's the aristocracy and the working class.
Right.
And so he literally says, yet here on the very first globe to be explored was an obvious peasant. He's like, I mean, yes, because that's what any civilized society would do. They would be like, well, here, even the fucking ships have a aristocracy class and a working class. And it's literally what side of the ship are you born on? Because they launch their babies like lifeboats. So if you launch, I was commenting on Threads as I was reading this because it was pretty hysterical. Then everything kept coming back to sex. It was like, oh, I've met these peasants. Oh, I'm in their head now. Oh, I wonder how they have sex. And then we went to the ships and he was like, how did they have sex? And then we went even farther, like the stars had sex. I was waiting for the nebulas to have sex, but he didn't explicitly say sex. He just said they longed for connection.
Right. They didn't interact directly at all.
The nebulas were probably the saddest.
That was really sad, especially when he referenced that all this other stuff, like he'd traveled through time and like traveled, like, I don't know, connected with, been a part of the whole development of the like solar, like the planetary consciousness to the like galaxy, the continent of the galaxy consciousness to the whole galactic consciousness to the cosmical consciousness, and over billions of years. And then And then he goes back to the beginning of the universe, looking for signs of the Star Maker. And before there's any stars or planets or anything, he senses something that feels alive. And he realizes it's the nebulae. And to them, like, thousands of years is
like
just
an hour.
an instant.
Yeah.
And so they realized that they were spreading apart from each other, and they despaired at the idea that they would get too far away from each other, that they would never be able to communicate again. And then he mentions that the oldest of the nebulae are still around when the like cosmical consciousness comes into being, and how at the beginning, I guess, of like stars forming, some of the nebula were talking about how, oh, they kind of feel uncomfortable, like something's happening, and that was like stars forming out of their material, and they would stop communicating, and oh, that nebula died. But then, like, there's still nebula around when the cosmical consciousness is still there. And from the nebula's perspective, this was a rapid disease that just ripped through its entire civilization.
Yeah.
And they're all gone, replaced with this, like, germ that's spread and propagated everywhere. And it's next.
They were sad because when they first form and they're really close to each other, they're not conscious. And by the time they become conscious enough to be aware of each other, they're too far apart to touch. And they're only ever getting farther apart. And so they're like, why could we not have been aware of each other when we could have been together? All they want to do is connect with each other, and they can't because they're constantly spreading, because the universe is constantly expanding. That was some sad shit.
So I'll give him credit. He made you feel bad for nebulas. Just like, I would say, in a similar way that, was it Becky Chambers did Song for the Wild Built? Yeah. The way Becky Chambers made you feel sad for a single fish that you had caught to eat.
Yeah.
And you watch it die, and you feel more sad for this fish dying so you can eat it than like any other thing in what was it? You said that made you feel more emotion in just that one scene with the fish than any of the ACOTAR books.
Shh. Don't tell Kate. So, yeah. But coming back to sort of closer to the beginning, before we get to the sad-ass nebulas and all that, because that's way, way, way. It's like 70 or 80% into the book.
Yeah.
Back to his, like, when he is really, you know what? Maybe this is intentional. Maybe he is at his most British when he is alone. And by the time he gathers enough consciousnesses, he dumps that. He's not as...
He has enough perspective.
Yeah, because he still has like a parochial, I guess. He still has a very Earth mindset when he arrives on his first planet. And he really has a dubious relationship with consent, which tracks for a 1930s man because he can go in people's heads and he can experience what they're experiencing. And when they don't like it, he's really pissed off. He's like, once he's in their head, he says, only when the other had come to realize my presence within him, could he, by a special act of volition, keep particular thoughts secret from me. He can even watch their dreams.
Yes.
Yeah. And then they keep getting angry and like going to get help, like going to therapists.
One of them goes to their therapist, and their therapist is like, well, if you do have an intergalactic traveler in your head, well, intergalactic traveler, hop into my head. I'll have a chat with you.
And
that's like a Hail Mary like therapy tactic. Like, oh, you have a voice in your head? Well, can the voice in your head come out into my head?
Yeah.
And then, no, it can't. It's in your head, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be the standard way it happens. But in this case, it does. And the therapist is like, oh,
hello,
well, hello.
friend. Hello, friend. So
I'm so excited to meet you. You're cured. Don't even worry about paying me.
Yeah.
Just
no,
go home.
This was a gift.
Problem solved. It's a win-win.
Yeah. But until then, he's been hopping around in heads, and people have been like taking medication and getting therapy to try to get him out. And he literally says, after I had spent, according to the local calendar, a year or so of bitter loneliness among minds who refused to treat me as a human being. And to be clear, he is an invading consciousness who just swoops his way
literally
into
a voice in their head.
Yeah. And is like, hello, friends. But they don't even experience the world the same way. So he's constantly bombarding them with images to be like, no, speak the king's English, you peasant. And so he's like shoving earth down their throats to try to get them an understanding of his life and his language so that they can communicate instead of being like, I'm going to chill here for a little bit. I'm going to figure out how to communicate with you, which is what he eventually does with Bavaltu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I pronounce it.
The other guy. And I highlighted this because this felt like the most relevant part of this whole scene because we live on this first planet for so long. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
The genitals also were equipped with taste organs.
Oh, man.
There were several distinctive
that had slipped out of my mind.
Male and female patterns of chemical characteristics, each powerfully attractive to the opposite sex. So these people are either bitter or sweet, or you can taste like a peasant. Peasants have their own flavor.
Well, it's more...
Or he calls them degenerates. They have their own flavor. And you can try to get yourself in with an aristocrat, but you have to wear perfume, like taste perfume. And then only on your wedding night will your partner realize what you actually taste like, which presupposes that they do not have sex until their wedding night, which is also like a huge British leap, but that's fine. So this was the first I was like, oh, I'm in for a male book, am I not? And I don't believe I ever got proven wrong. Oh, yeah. And then they start to kind of fall apart. This was really interesting because he was talking about this planet and how it would go through these cycles of development like a golden age, and then they'd reach a utopia, and then they'd all kind of lose their mind. Or as, this is interesting because I get to reference all the science fiction authors we've talked to, as George Paxson has called it, the endarkenment.
Yes, as... opposite of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, where you leave science, you turn to religion, and then you just start bombing the crap out of everybody. And at first, our lens, our observer character is like, oh no, I can learn something from this because this is like what's happening on my planet right now. And then he's like, actually, no, they're inferior. Because he goes, I suspected increasingly that some factors still hidden from me doomed them to a frustration which my own nobler species need never fear. Oh, and then they get a radio. This was really, he had a lot of really good predictive stuff, especially in this first section when we were actually talking about culture and civilization.
Yes.
Because they get this radio in their pocket because sight.
He's a very effective futurist.
He is a very effective futurist because they don't really use sight. That's not a mode that is something that they understand a lot of. So they do a lot of taste. And so they actually have these taste sense radios. And they end up becoming so preoccupied with these taste sense radios. They even propose that people will be like put to sleep, like literally put under.
You'll be put in a bed, like bed bound.
Yeah.
And put in like a VR, like full simulation, like headset thing.
Yeah.
And just.
Ready Player One.
Yeah. You'll live out your whole life in VR. The Matrix.
Yeah. The Matrix.
Yeah.
And when you are ready to go, you can also just euthanize yourself with a button as well.
Yeah. You'll have euthanasia button.
Yeah. Okay. And then they figure out how to make radio porn because that is who this man is. And they figure out how to transmit the same sense, like the same taste sense that you would get from actual intercourse over the radio. And then there's a big debate about whether they should only transmit female taste so that men can enjoy it, or whether it's okay to transmit both male and female so that both men and women can engage in like radio OnlyFans or whatever. And then we get this banger of a line. Militarists also were strongly opposed to the new invention, which is the sex radio. For in the cheap and efficient production of illusory sexual embraces, they saw a danger even more serious than contraception. The supply of cannon fodder would decline. If you have good enough porn, people won't go out and have sex. You don't get accidental pregnancies. You don't get people signing up for the military.
Right.
Thank you, Olaf.
Slum
conditions could be tolerated.
It still is accurate today.
No. Yeah, he's a very efficient futurist. Slum conditions could be tolerated if there was an unfailing supply of illusory luxury. The feed, anyone?
Back on that previous note, I think there was a bill in U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
That specifically mentioned that the supply might have been about not abortion,
contraception,
adoption,
family planning. Okay.
But it was it had a phrase something like there's a dwindling supply of babies available for adoption, like it's a
problem,
like a commodity.
Yeah.
The supply.
It always reminds me of
babies.
That facetious Irish article about how to eat babies.
It was the leaked draft of Supreme Court Justice Alito's opinion for overturning Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
And it refers to the domestic supply of infants as a factor for why abortion is a bad thing. Because if there's easily accessible abortion, it will impact the domestic supply of infants.
Okay. Well, I want to read you.
Okay. Anyway, so it still holds to this day, Olaf. Good job.
And here's a satirical essay from 1729. I mentioned this on the Discord the other day. I was like, oh, like the guy who suggested we eat babies. And they were like, what the shit? So, apparently, this isn't common knowledge, so I'll throw it out there for you. It's by Jonathan Swift. It was written in 1729, and it is called A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People from Being a Burden to Their Parents and Their Country. And for making them beneficial to the public, with a K. And here's a line, and I'll read it because it's at the top here on this article.
Well, in the 1700s, spelling hadn't been standardized.
Correct. And it says, a young, healthy child, well nursed, is, at a year old, a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. And I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout. So all of it is about, you can eat them. We can use them for, like, he has all these facetious things that you can use babies for because apparently the children of the poor are a burden to their people and their country. So this was a conversation we've been having for a really long time, and he references it and he does it in a wonderful, perfect. Here's another one. I got a lot of quotes from this first world because we spend the most time on this first world. Everything else is real broad strokes, but this world, for some particular reason, he had a lot to say about this world. And this is one of my favorites. Unfortunately, owing to the diversity of gustatory human types, because human is people, human is alien,
yes.
Human is everything.
Human is
an instance
sentient
of mind.
Person.
Yeah. Unfortunately, owing to the diversity of gustatory human types, there had seldom been any widespread agreement as to the taste of God. And then he talks more about, over time, the division between the peasant class and the working class and the aristocracy class grows wider. And we get this line: the working classes, indeed, who slaved for the owners in return for a mere pittance, gave much of their miserable earnings to the priests and lived in more abject squalor than they need have done. And I feel like he's pulling a Star Trek this first planet feels like he's pulling a Star Trek. Like he's making commentary on English
Yes.
Earth
Yeah.
culture.
He's using this
Western culture.
fantastical setting to provide a stage for making commentary on his life, on his existence.
It's really like, well, while I've got you, let me go ahead and throw this at you.
This is why it feels so progressive to me.
Yeah.
Is because he consistently makes like good points about the deficiencies of like the whole, I don't know, like British 1800s and 1900s civilization.
Yeah.
Like without being, I don't know,
too controversial. It's pulling a Star
Yeah.
Trek.
Yeah.
We're not discriminating against black people. We're discriminating against Klingons. Get it right.
They're not the same.
This isn't the same. Yeah. This is about another planet. Why would you assume I was talking about
There's not even humans there.
Come on, right? And I actually like the first planet a lot. I was really engaged in the novel at this point because we actually get communication between two characters. Because our narrator talks to Bavaltu.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So this part, there's actually dialogue.
There's dialogue. And we get
and
this.
And then as soon as they leave this planet,
no, fucking God.
There's no dialogue.
That's why I'm saying he wrote 35% of this book and then he took some amazing shrooms. And when he woke up, it was finished. And he was like, well, I can't top that. I'm just going to leave it. It's fine.
He was autistic info dumping.
Yeah.
For 70% of the book.
So long. It's too linear to be ADHD. You're right. I think it's definitely autistic. But anyway, we get this one from Bavaltu and he says, and if after all there is no star maker, if the great company of galaxies leapt into being of their own accord, and even if this little nasty world of ours is the only habitation of the spirit anywhere among the stars, and this world doomed, even so, I must praise. But if there is no star maker, what can it be that I praise? I do not know. I will call it only the sharp tang and savor of existence. But to call it this is to say little. I like that.
Yeah.
I like Baval too. And then he just gets absorbed into British Man and we never hear from him again.
They become a new like conjoined consciousness.
He teaches him how to travel, or as he says, it would be tedious to tell of the experiments by which we acquired and perfected the art of controlled flight through interstellar space. Would it be tedious, Olaf? I would really hate for anything in this book to be tedious.
I feel like Olaf's metric for tedium is very different from our metric. The
tedious bar has been set, and it is low. Okay.
At least he recognized there is a line.
Yeah.
And discussing, like speculating on what it would be like to teach an alien how to like astral plane travel. Oh, that would be crossing the line. Okay.
Right.
So I'm not going to include any of that. I'll just skip over it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe that line, that threshold could have been in a slightly different spot.
Yeah. Maybe. If you're going to hand wavy anything, astral projection, I guess we can hand wavy that. That's fine.
Which he does provide an explanation for it.
Yeah.
That the ichthyoid, the symbiotic race, their very, very far future civilization generated this technology that like selects people from different planets.
Yeah.
And
there's a purpose.
Yeah. So they are enabled by some mechanism of some development by a future civilization to do this like disembodied travel through the cosmos.
Yeah.
And that's why it happened to him. He just happened to be the one picked. Boop.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of this is for a collection of minds wander the universe explore, experience lots of different alien civilizations, grow from that experience, develop some sense of like cosmic wisdom, and then try to bring that back home.
Or by the end, he figures he's a god.
His collection of minds at the time is cosmic scale.
Yeah. He is that universe. By the time he's done, he is the consciousness of that universe, that cosmos. By the time he meets the Star Maker. Which is why the bar for tedium is just like, anyway. And then we get this part where he like takes a second and he's like, listen, I know this is going to sound really, really crazy. And I'm glad you guys are with me on this ride. And I know it's going to sound like it's not going to sound real, but it absolutely happened. And like, I'm going to have a hard time writing it down because all of the things that happen from here on out happen to like a cosmic version of myself that I can no longer fully embody because I've
lost that grounding, that sense of lived experience and understanding. So I only have intimations of what it was actually like.
Because once he gets Bavaltu off the planet, they spend some time traveling around and then eventually
they get lost.
And they're like, well,
sorry, Bavaltu, I can't drop you off at home.
Yeah. So I guess we're just going to have to wander around till we figure this out. And so they do. They go on a bit of a journey. But he says, I can only hope.
A bit of a journey.
So while he's telling us, like, okay, shit's about to get real, he says, I can only hope that they have the kind of truth that we sometimes find in myths. He's talking about the stories that he's going to write. And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it. The truth we find in myths.
Yeah.
The distilled truth we find in stories. So from here on out, we go world. First, we go person to person, and then we go world to world. And this is when we get the weirdest worlds. And we get like the people that have lost their atmosphere. We get the living ships. Oh yeah, and when we're on the living ship planet, we get this line. In the recent past, loud lip service had been paid to gentleness and tolerance and freedom, but the policy had failed because there was no sincere purpose in it, no conviction of the spirit, no true experience of respect for individual personality. I was like, wow, Olaf. You know what? These men spent so much time alone. Alone in deep thought, smoking cigars.
So here's what came to my mind when I was thinking about what are we going to talk about. There was a meme talking about like, okay, modern day like science.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, after spending, 8 years in school and 10 years working on like other research projects, I have spent the last 4 years on my own research project to say that in this very constrained set of conditions, we can make these very accurate statements in a reliable way to say that this happens and here's a mechanism to explain it. And then like ancient science was, hey guys, here's what I thought of while I was in the bathtub, and this is universal truth.
Yeah, basically.
So,
we had some really good sherry.
We're still on like the bathtub side of like natural science philosophy when this guy wrote this book.
There's that line from The Time Machine when they eat dinner and then they go and sit, and it's like that ponderous fog of post-dinner intellectualism or whatever, where you've had a really good sherry, you just ate really good food, you're going to go sit and smoke some cigars with your bros, and you're just going to talk science. And by the time
this is like every night I hang out with my BFF.
Exactly. Except
he makes really good food.
Except you turn around
and then we have some drinks, and then we just ramble for like 2 hours.
Right. Well, it is the way of men, apparently.
Apparently.
From time immemorial.
It still happens.
Yeah. One of the worlds that I thought was really, really... we're going to talk a lot about the first part and a lot less about the second part because I feel like there's a lot more happening in the first part that we can actually talk about. And then the second half is just like, what is happening and why is my mind not leaking out of my nose?
The second 2/3 of the book or the second half of the book, you can summarize pretty succinctly.
Very rapidly. But he's talking about all of these different civilizations and what has been their downfall. And this one cracked me the fuck up because of what I read with Kate and Hannah, where we have really pedestaled these 7-foot tall, like 8-pack abs, thighs that could crush a concrete block, like these fucking like men, right? And so there's this planet where the women all become like they all gain economic independence. And so they stop wanting to to date, and they all want to have children with brute men. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
They've all fallen in love with the romantic notion of these brute men. And so they literally go out in the world and they select like 5 of the most perfect specimens. And they're like, this guy's $10,000, this guy's $8,000, this guy's 6,
right.
4.
They all have like
$10.
In vitro fertilization.
The entire generation is fertilized by these same brute men, and everyone becomes so inbred it leads to the downfall of civilization.
The brute men are not intelligent or sensitive or nuanced.
Yeah.
And so the next generation following is you need a diverse set of personality traits.
Right.
Because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. An entire generation has the same dads. Yeah. Is what happens.
So the entire generation has the same dads, which I hadn't thought of the inbreeding thing. But what he says in the book is they basically all had the same psychological predilections for here's how we respond to problems. And they failed to respond correctly to problems because they narrowed the psychological profile down so much.
Yeah. And they all devolve into like the most himbo of himbos. And it's like this state of affairs continued for some millions of years, but at last the race was destroyed by the ravages of a small rat-like animal against which they could devise no protection. They get killed by mice because they're like, I don't know what to do. But I thought that was really hysterical because it really rang. It was like he saw his wife reading a romance novel that had like a beefy dude on the cover. Like she probably got a Penny Dreadful or something that had a beefy dude on the cover, and he was like, "Ugh, I can't believe you like that kind of guy." She's like, "Every woman would have this kind of guy if she could," and he's like, "Oh, would they? What would happen? You need me because I'm sensitive and intelligent." And I go and sit in the heather while you clean the house and put the kids to bed after me. And I project myself out into the universe. So
that was me. I found the tweet.
Thank you. But anyway, it reminds me of these Instagram videos I've watched that are like, why do women have children with these men? Like, the men. Like my woman should respect me. My woman is like, here's a woman's role. Those dudes, we could literally fuck that out of the gene pool
in one generation,
in like 1 or 2 generations. You just got to stop. You just got to stop having kids with those dudes.
Yeah, just don't humor them.
Yeah, we just watched Warm Bodies, which is going to be I think it's going to be our movie pretty soon that we're going to talk about. And I was like, this must be written by a woman. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was written by a man. But get you be the man you see women talking about. Don't be the man you see men talking about.
Yes.
If a man says this is what you need to be to attract women, he's probably lying out his asshole. Okay? If you see a woman saying this is what I find attractive, she's a subject matter expert.
And I would say I acknowledge my privilege of having an absentee father. So that growing up, I had a predominantly female perspective, and the I guess, okay, this might be probably the bigger contributing factor. All of my male role models, besides like my grandpa, were Boy Scout dads.
Yeah.
They were the kinds of dads who were willing to take their kids every week, their boys every week, to a meeting, and then like once a month go on a camping trip and like humor all the other little boys and play and whatever.
Yeah.
Like all the green flag guys.
Yeah.
Were my role models. So I was privileged in that situation.
Yeah. I mean, here's a tip. No woman has Andrew Tate as the background on her phone.
Nope.
No. If he's saying he knows the secret to what women find attractive, but no women find him attractive, you put 2 and 2 together. I'm going to leave that up to you. So if you want to get our joke about tedium, here's a snippet from the Living Ship planet. Speech, that essential medium of the developed mentality, had 2 distinct modes in this world. For short-range communication, rhythmic underwater emissions of gas from a vent in the rear of the organism were heard and analyzed by means of underwater ears. Stop making Stop! Okay. Long-distance
short-range communication, honey.
Yeah, thank you. Long-distance communication was carried on by means of semaphore signals from a rapidly agitating tentacle on the masthead.
Because that's as creative as he could get in that situation.
He wasn't on the good shrooms yet, okay? Those were not the good shrooms. He hadn't gotten them yet, yeah. But he just gets so bogged down for so long on these planets. So then he's finally, we zoom out a little bit. And each time he zooms out, he gets to speculate about the Star Maker a little bit more. He's like, well, maybe the Star Maker is really varied, and that's why he creates all these varied things. And oh, wow, a lot of these planets get destroyed, like right when or right before they become human, which he means they gain full consciousness. So that seems really sad. Like that feels really, maybe the Star Maker isn't a good guy.
Right. He starts to have second thoughts. Maybe there is an entity that created the universe. Maybe it's not a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean for my life?
Yeah.
If the creator of the universe is a bad guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So we go from his planet, to people, individual people, to cultures and civilizations, to whole ass planets, because eventually people start to learn how to communicate telepathically. And once people start to learn how to communicate telepathically, whole planets become a single organism. And then we figure out how to travel. And I thought okay, Olaf, because he was like, rocket ships? No. Rocket ships, I'm going to leave that up to C.S. Lewis and H.G. Wells. They've beat that dead horse to death. I'm going to leave it. What if we just moved the whole fucking planet? You don't have to get off the planet if you just, it's like having a camper. It's like having an RV. You just hitch it up.
You convert your whole planet into an RV.
Yeah. And then you just, poof, you go off.
And you create an artificial sun to orbit your RV while you're traveling from one solar system to another.
Yeah.
And then when you arrive, you just get into a stable orbit and greet the locals.
Yeah. And then a bunch of cultures start doing this, and then they divide. So now a culture isn't an individual group of people, it is planets. So whole planets will come together and form cultures and civilizations. And one of them is evil and one of them is good, because one of them is like live and let live. And the other one is like, we know best. We should probably, it's like the dark forest.
Yeah.
We should destroy these other planets before they have the opportunity to destroy us. Or as he says, pity they felt, pity such as we felt for a child that has broken its toy, but no indignation against fate.
So this is the group of minds that are all wandering together that our narrator is a member of.
Yeah.
Is monitoring, just wandering around, boop, 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 looking around, watching the evolution of civilizations throughout the galaxy, and here's a planet that's very developed and is like a planetary consciousness. And yeah, things are going pretty good for it. And then here comes this other planet from this like warfaring civilization, and they just come blow up the whole thing. And they're like, oh, well, that's regrettable that happened.
They blow up their sun.
Anyway,
yeah.
Here's some other cool shit.
Well, they are the impassive observer.
Right.
Sometimes they'll steer a civilization. They'll pop in and they'll help. Because every once in a while they'll try to guide a civilization towards being
give it some
benevolent.
advice. Yeah.
And then they step back like, okay, now y'all do it on your own. See if you can figure this out. But we get this whole section where the universe is divided into empires.
Like, okay, kids. Like I was showing my daughter the other day. Here's how you swing an axe to chop some wood.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, I've gone through the motions with you a few times. Now I'm going to step back and I'm going to hit 911 on my phone and I'm going to watch you do it with my finger right over the call button. Except they don't have galactic 911.
Yeah.
They're just like, you messed up that axe swing.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Correct.
Anyway.
Yeah. So these bands are roaming around, and if you're wondering, Olaf figured out how to make them have sex. Between individual systems of worlds, as between symbiotic partners, there's sometimes occurred relationships with an almost sexual flavor, though no actual sex played part in them. I mean, they don't have genitals, so
yeah,
they just stared at each other sensually, I guess. I don't know.
So sexual intercourse is about an exchange of material that's developmental in nature.
Yeah.
So I'm just like bullshitting out my ass.
I know
right
you
now.
are.
But
I'm glad you see it too.
Just rationalizing how that could actually make sense.
Olaf.
Okay, so two planets can exchange culture and ideas that each provoke new development
well, what happens
in the
is
other.
These are kind of like blobs. So each planet is sort of like a sticky blob. And when they interact with another planet, that their telepathic communication like connects them all, and then they become one civilization. So they are sort of
That's
merging
different
on a
than
very
the original two.
Just like our observer is collecting minds and merging them into a new emergent personality, all of these planets are merging and becoming an emergent personality in and of themselves. And except for the one planet that is the fish and crabs, because they had to come up with a system of communication because they've been symbiotic for this whole long time. And it ends up actually making them advance really fast. And so they're the ones that they're like, y'all crazy. We're going to go over here. We're checking out. Don't bother us. And eventually the evil empire sends a planet over there and they're like, okay, come on. You can come orbit our sun. That's fine. And they like lure it in and then they sever its ties from the telepathic communication.
Right. They kill all the telepathic communication on the planet.
Right. And then the people are just, they're too barbaric to live. So they end up killing themselves. And then they're like, okay, well, that was regrettable. But hey, look, guys, we got a new planet. And then they send another planet and they do it again. And finally they're like, no, we can't go there. Nobody comes back. Like,
but
that's when they explode the sun.
The fish crab planet is like, we don't want to remake our entire civilization. We know that we are developed enough that if we converted into a warfaring society, we would just wipe these people off the map.
We don't. That's a step we cannot take.
We can't do that because we wouldn't be able to come back from it.
Right. It would too fundamentally change who we are. So we're not willing to do it. So they actually endure getting blown up 3 times. And then they figure out how to completely sever the connection for all of these people in this empire. And it's a really interesting, like, he ends up saying, like, I wish that pacifism would work on a micro scale.
Mm-hmm.
That we could literally allow whole civilizations of planets to be destroyed in all right, guys, don't do it again.
Turn the other cheek.
Do it once, shame on me. Do it twice, shame on you. Third time, we're going to sever your telepathic connection with each other for the rest of eternity. And it's just a really interesting, okay, so then we go from there, and then we zoom out again, and we go from planet consciousness.
I thought, back to the
Yeah.
the fish crab society,
Sure.
civilization. After they sever all of the telepathic communication in the like warfaring planets, they then like send emissaries to train them
Oh, yeah.
back up. And sometimes it works,
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't, but they're mildly successful at reforming these planetary societies.
Yeah.
To get them to come back up to a developed state, but be nice now.
Well, they don't want to sacrifice these people because, as he says, diversity and multiplicity of worlds was as necessary on the galactic plane as diversity and multiplicity of individuals on the world plane and diversity and multiplicity of nerve cells on the individual plane.
Yep.
So this section was really interesting. And from here, we sort of put the pedal to the floor in terms of weirdness, because he starts speculating that maybe the whole purpose of creating this cosmos and allowing these people to become connected and allowing this whole cosmos to become a single emergent personality is for the Star Maker to create a wife.
Back to sex.
He's like, I'm pretty sure God needs someone to bang. But as he says, he can't just make her. So we imagine that he made her of his hunger for beauty and his will for love, but also that he scourged her in the making and tormented her so that she might at last triumph over all adversity. And this just brings me back to my earlier point, which is, gentlemen, you should not be the challenge your wife has to overcome.
Right.
She should not have to prepare herself to battle you. So just, if you're thinking that, don't think that. Get therapy. So we move on and we ultimately zoom out again and we're like, okay, so now whole planet systems, whole solar systems are now entities. We've got now
whole chunks of the galaxy.
Right. Well, we do just solar system because this is when we're like, hey, I'm a solar system. I want to go hang out with this other solar system. But the whole moving planets thing is great. But when we're moving a bunch of them, it's hard to get enough artificial suns together. And that's the big thing. What if we move the sun and we just follow the sun?
Just move the whole solar system.
It's like a bigger RV. We'll go from a 20-footer to a 45-footer. Okay.
Yeah.
And so they start moving their sun. It's successful. They are on their way to the other solar system and the sun blows up and destroys everybody. And they're like, well, that's an unfortunate coincidence. And then another sun blows up and then another sun blows up and then some planets or suns that are too old to explode. He seemed to think only young stars.
Right. And that was probably the astronomy of the time.
But he was saying that older, like red giants, would send out a solar flare and would scourge the planets in their orbit.
Right. Basically, the suns started killing planets.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what was going on.
Well, they're like, that's too much of a thing.
Like maybe it's because they were harvesting directly from the suns, the stars. They were harvesting
geometry for ocelots.
Yeah, they were engineering.
Yeah, they were exploding them for their resources. They were moving them. They were meddling with suns. And
it turns out the stars didn't like that.
Yeah. The stars are sentient. And so then we're going to talk about the stars and how the stars also believe in like beauty, and their entire purpose is to hold their place in the dance. And don't worry, he figured out how to make them have sex too.
But none of them would take their place. None of them would move out of their prescribed place in the dance seeking sex, but they would admire the small number of stars that were able to enjoy sex with other stars.
Yeah, you had to get close enough to each other by pure chance.
Basically, if two stars became like a binary star system and merged, that was star sex.
Yeah, if so, the life of each star is experienced not only as the perfect execution of formal beauty, but also as the perfect expression of love. And so what was happening is these people were moving stars and blowing stars up and doing all kinds of star shenanigans. And the stars didn't know that there were people and that it was being done to them. They thought they were doing it and that they were being immoral. And so they were destroying themselves to prevent themselves from being immoral and throwing the whole dance out of balance. And eventually they learn how to make contact with the suns, and then the suns and the solar systems all become a single consciousness. And then we zoom out again, and now we're talking full galactic consciousness. The entire galaxy has a single consciousness. And that gets a little tedious. I'm not even going to talk about it. We zoom out.
Like they send out, now we have communication between galaxies.
Yeah.
Where each galaxy is a person. And then they start sending, I don't know, communications teams out to galaxies that had not yet achieved galactic consciousness to like educate the planetary systems and the stars about each other before they had this warfare, because this combat, this battle between the stars and the people on the planets was a pattern that happened in lots of different galaxies, and it exhausted the resources of the stars way faster than if they hadn't been battling each other.
Right.
So they're like, maybe we can like extend, like save some time, like get them through that hurdle of realizing that, oh, the planets are sentient, the stars are sentient. You need to talk to each other. Use your words before you use your hands. And
yeah.
And then now you get galaxy consciousnesses talking to each other in such a large scale that you have this collective multi-galaxy consciousness.
Yes.
The cosmical consciousness.
Yeah. That's what I said. He puts the pedal to the floor. He's like, y'all ready to go? Because we're about to fucking go. And then finally, we talk to the sad ass nebulas, which is honestly the saddest part of the entire
Right.
book.
Oh, he gets to the end of the universe.
Yeah.
And there's no signs of the Star Maker. So
because
he's like,
the universe goes out because all the suns have exploded themselves. And so it hastens the death of the universe.
Right. It's the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
Which he goes into tedious detail.
I think that might have been when I fell asleep. Like the Kindle fell out of my hand. It was like a cartoon, you know, when you watch the mom in the cartoon and her head tips forward and then the book falls out of her hand. It was like that, only it was a Kindle. And it was Olaf's fault.
Almost 100 years ago, Olaf. Jeez.
But finally, he goes from the very end. He can travel in time and space at this point. So he travels all the way back to the beginning of the universe. And this is when we meet the nebulas. And then eventually he finds the Star Maker. He zooms out far enough. He's like, all right, well, I've literally met everything in the universe at this point. There must be some overarching consciousness. Like every time I zoom out, I find a consciousness. There must be one. So I would like to read you the description of the Star Maker.
The first description or the second description?
The one where he witnesses it and then he zips away.
Okay.
He's like, ah! Okay. He leaves. Okay. It seemed to me that this effulgent star was the center of a four-dimensional sphere whose curved surface was the three-dimensional cosmos, the star of stars. This star was indeed the Star Maker, was perceived by me, its cosmical creature, for one moment before its splendor seared my vision, and in that moment I knew that I had indeed seen the very source of all cosmical life and light and mind, and of how much else besides I had yet no knowledge. So he zooms all the way out. He sees like four-dimensional Star Maker being, and he's like, well, that fried my little brain. And so he zips back out, and then he has a dream.
He goes on a vision quest.
He somehow it's like a meta vision quest, because he goes on a vision quest in his vision quest. It's like when you have a flashback in a flashback.
He kind of explains it at the end that it's more that the dream was his way of unpacking that momentary exposure to the Star Maker.
Does he get hit with the bright light when he sees the 4-dimensional being, or does he get hit with that in his dream? Because he tries to perceive the Star Maker and he gets like engulfed in light and it blinds him.
Right.
And then he goes on this journey.
I think he opens his eyes too much. And then he has to, that was too bright.
Okay. Because then he goes on this journey where he sees the Star Maker from immaturity to mature.
The range of cosmoses that the Star Maker has maked.
Yeah. And ours is the one that he made after he got a little bit. He made a bunch and
he got a little bit better at it.
He made a bunch and they weren't so great. And he stopped and meditated for a while. And then he created something way better. And that's England. So
the universe that has England in it. But it's not the ultimate cosmos.
No, it's not. He keeps going and it gets, I got to be honest, it was like, it's just like, yep, that all sounds great. And in this one, there was no gravity. And this one was 2-dimensional. And this one was all about music. These people were made of music. And you're like, Olaf, I hope you didn't take can you OD on mushrooms? Can you? Because I feel like you're close. You're so close right now.
So the Star Maker goes through a phase where they are creating universes with rules to produce like a specific outcome. And like the rules are constrained so that the outcome is more predictable.
Yeah.
And then they're like, like this isn't satisfying. This isn't
Star Maker is male. Get it right.
That's true.
Sorry.
He uses he.
I'm sorry.
I'm using they.
I got a little triggered. Go ahead. No, it's fine.
So that's not producing anything interesting, useful, novel. So then they meditate for a little while and then they say, okay, I'm just going to create a universe with a set of rules with no like planned intervention built in.
Yeah.
Because some previous universes, they had planned that they were going to intervene with specific societies that emerged, whatever. But then this one, nah, I'm just going to set the ground rules, set the initial conditions, and let it run. And I don't have my fingers in the pie.
Yeah.
And maybe something more interesting will come out of this. And it does. And they like what they see and they develop on that and refine their process for creating a universe. But Olaf doesn't go into detail because Olaf doesn't remember it.
Yeah. Once more, but in shame and adoration, I cried out to my Maker. I said, "It is enough, and far more than enough, to be the creature of so dread and lovely a spirit, whose potency is infinite, whose nature passes the comprehension even of a minded cosmos. It is enough to have been created, to have embodied this moment, the infinite and tumultuously creative spirit. It is infinitely more than enough to have been used, to have been the rough sketch for some perfected creation." So we meet God ultimately at the end, but we kind of only perceive him in a dream. So I think it's left up to you whether he simply perceived the next layer above nebula, the 4-dimensional layer beyond our 3-dimensional space, and then his mind created this vision of God based on his expectations, or whether that being was actually God.
Right.
Yeah. Because immediately after that, pretty much, he shatters and goes back into his individual peoples. And he goes back to being the guy in the heather who went out there to go hang out and get away from his wife. And he kind of takes what he learned and he gives you this like, in my mind, I traveled around the planet and I saw all the people and I saw the conflict that was coming and I saw, I love that he's like, I saw Germany and I saw its cathedrals and I saw the men gathered in the square out in the cathedral with like jackboots and helmets or whatever. And I saw England and I saw Big Ben and I saw France and I saw the Eiffel Tower and I saw Africa and I saw the British and Dutch exploiting the African people. The highlights. I saw Egypt and Black people in Africa. So I'm like, thank you so much, Olaf, for that. It's the 1930s. It's
Right.
the 1930s. He was, the fact that he mentioned their plight at all was, it was something. It was not nothing.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because he comes back with like, I clearly need to help. I need to do what I can to steer my civilization, even knowing we're eventually going to have to flee to Mars and then flee to Neptune, which like, sorry, do that. Or Uranus. We're going to run to, was it Uranus or Neptune?
I think Neptune.
It was one of the gaseous ones that we absolutely can't live on. So like, nice try. I didn't even know that we didn't have a picture of it until Voyager flew by it, until I was watching a documentary with the kids.
Oh, of Neptune?
Yeah. Which would be the 70s. So we've only known what Neptune looked like for like 50 years.
Wow.
Which is pretty impressive. So anyway, we get this really cool line. This last line, I mean, a lot happens. But at this point, you're just like, you've literally been sitting in this lecture for 8 hours.
There's no pauses for just some downtime.
Nothing.
For processing.
Nothing.
Right?
My suggestion would be to read this book like 2 or 3 pages at a time. Like when you sit down to read, you read 2 or 3 pages of this book and then you set it aside and you read a book with a plot. Or you move on, like that's how you start your morning. You don't go on to read, but this is not bingeable. This is like when we talk.
It's too dense.
It's dense. It's relentless. It is stream of consciousness effectively, where it's literally like 8 audio hours, or I think my Kindle told me it took me 6.5 hours to read it. But like it is 6.5 hours of slog, of ever expanding floral.
10 hours.
10 hours. Wow.
10 hours and 41 minutes for the audiobook.
Wow. Of floral, overwrought, dense, speculative, just
observation and contemplation.
It's like learning the history of a world that never happened, but that you also don't care about. And it's not a bad book. It's just not the kind of book we're used to reading. Like, oh God, I got this 900-page book. I crushed it. It was so good. Nobody crushes The Star Maker.
Right.
It's
so
definitely
good.
Maybe somebody does.
Informative about how like sci-fi literature has changed.
I would love to have a conversation with Olaf. Did he make small talk? Or was this what every conversation with him was like? He was like, so tell me, what would you do if you encountered a 4-dimensional being? Because I know what I would do. I spent he didn't consider himself a fiction writer. Not that he was
born in 1886.
Oh, he was like 10 when most of H.G. Wells's like banger books came out. So he probably grew up reading those.
He passed away in 1950.
God, I hate it when they make it to an age where you're like, there could be pictures of you. And they wrote this shit.
Yeah, there's pictures of them.
Oh, look at. Anyway, so.
Does that look like a man who would write this book?
Yes. Yes, it does. It's the most British face I've ever seen in my entire life. So, in short, should you read this book? Yes. I think everyone should probably at least give this book a shot. I don't think you just sit down and crush this book. And if you go a little cross-eyed in the end and you don't wring meaning out of every single sentence, I think that's probably okay.
At the audiobook, I got to like 57%, and then it's like, I need to finish this. So I had the audiobook from when I listened to it like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The audiobook is very listenable.
I feel like this would be a book better listened to. Normally I'm like, no, I think I would comprehend this better reading, but I honestly feel like it would feel like a podcast if I was listening to it. But reading it, I have a different expectation for it. You need to grab my attention.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you're listening to it, you can be you can be enough inattentive that you can maintain focus on it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like I literally kept falling asleep reading this. But I think I can see the roots of a lot of science fiction stories in this.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can see the roots.
There's a reason it's on a lot of lists of formative sci-fi.
Formative. I would absolutely describe this as formative. The way he pushed the boat out in terms of imagination for what you could have in a science fiction universe and the types of worlds that might exist and the scope at which you can operate. I think all of that is important. Because you look at like H.G. Wells, he's like, yeah, the Martians shot cylinders at us and they all happened to land in England. Not nice.
Whoa.
What?
What a coincidence.
Or you get a lot of people traveling to the moon. Hey guys, we made it to the moon, which is fine. But in terms of cosmical scale, because he uses cosmical constantly, that's why I keep saying cosmical. In terms of cosmical scale, it's small. We literally, we got to your satellite. Well, congratulations. Yeah, that's great. Did you make it to Mars? No, too far. So we have a lot of, the first men in the moon, or maybe we might travel to Venus, or we might travel to Mars. If you fall asleep in a cave, you go to Venus or Mars, that's definitely how that's done. But we don't think what's outside the solar system. What happens if we go bigger? What happens if we go real big?
And what happens if we go even bigger and then even bigger?
And then we meet God. So I think somebody has to do that first, and they don't have to do it best. They just have to do it first. And is this the best huge scale science fiction novel I've ever read?
I would say he did it first. He didn't necessarily do it best, but he did it the most comprehensively.
Yes. He left no stone unturned. Not one. You have a question? Don't worry, Olaf's got you. He's got the answer. And he's in his book.
What did sex taste like for aliens? The answer is in this book.
It depends on whether you're a peasant or not. I thought we already covered that.
Well, and it was like region-based.
Yeah.
Like you'd have a race that lived on this continent versus a race that lived on another continent, and their sex would taste different.
Yeah, the women also vomited food into their children's mouths, and sometimes their husbands too. So that was really funny. Like, honey, do you want some noodle salad? No, I'm busy. We'll just come over here. Gives a whole new meaning to the feed your husband. The way to your husband's heart is through his stomach. Okay, great. Well, I can do that. Especially, I don't know, it's weird. Anyway, we're done talking about this book. But I think you should go read this book. I don't think we can accurately describe the feeling of reading this book. It felt like reading, it was like if Geometry for Ocelots didn't have a plot, and it was just about this universe,
just a speculative version of
where they figure out how to mine stars, and the stars are going out, and then somebody is just watching the Bivnik effect take place, and the whole universe die of heat death. And they even mention in this book that there are races that expand beyond consciousness, that move into another plane of being, and they lose connection.
They lose track of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Like in Geometry for Ocelots, where if you can survive long enough, you can transcend the dimensional space that you live in, but you have to figure out how to cancel out the Bivnik effect first.
Right.
If you don't know what we're talking about, go read Geometry for Ocelots. That's a really good book. I actually mean it's a really good book. I don't mean it like I mean this one, which is like
actually engaging and exciting.
This one you read for clout. This is Geometry for Ocelot. You read for the book.
Yeah, I would say Star Maker is for clout and perspective.
Clout and perspective. If you are a sci-fi fan, you identify as a sci-fi fan. You are the type of person who talks about sci-fi at parties. You need to have Star Killer under your belt.
Star Maker.
Sorry.
Star Killer is completely different. This is a Star Wars character or ship.
Isn't that Rainbow Bright? No, Rainbow Bright and the Star Stealer. That's it. And then in Crescent City, there's a Star Eater. I have a lot of star things going on in my head right now. In fact, I compared Crescent City to Rainbow Bright and the Star Stealer. So if you're interested in why I did that, listen to Feast, Sheath, and Shatter.
Rachel's yet another podcast.
I know. Well, I like what I like. So I guess we'll just leave it there.
So remember, sometimes the strangest things are the most beautiful too.
I actually think Olaf would agree with us.
Yeah.
So be who you are and love what you love. Until next time, friends.
Bye.